So I never imagined that the night my roommate casually dropped the, "Hey, do you want to join us?" line would be the night everything changed. Like, seriously, one minute we're just chilling after a long day, and the next, I'm sitting there trying to process that my roommate not only has a boyfriend now, but also wants me involved in whatever us means. Spoiler alert, it wasn't as weird or awkward as I thought it'd be. But let me back up a bit, because this whole thing didn't start with an open invite to some kind of love triangle party. My name's Alex, and if you asked me a few weeks ago where I saw my love life heading, sharing a boyfriend with my roommate definitely wouldn't have been in the top 10. I'm a 27-year-old graphic designer, pretty low-key, and up until recently, I was dead set on keeping my living space strictly roommate zone. My roommate Chris is this charismatic, kinda effortlessly cool guy who works in tech, and we've managed to coexist without any drama for about a year. You know the usual, sharing bills, swapping weekend plans, the occasional, "Hey, can you grab some milk?" Text.Chris has always been pretty open about his dating life, which, to be honest, sometimes made me feel like the odd one out. I'm not exactly the smoothest when it comes to meeting people, and for the longest time, my romantic life was mostly a series of awkward coffee dates and ghosted texts. Meanwhile, Chris seemed to have this revolving door of guys coming and going, and honestly, I was a little jealous. Not just because he dated so much, but because he seemed genuinely happy, and I was still stuck trying to figure out what I even wanted. So yeah, when Chris started hanging out with this guy named Jamie a few weeks ago, I figured it was just another casual thing. Jamie worked at a local bookstore, had this easy smile, and somehow made Chris light up in a way I hadn't seen before. I noticed the way Chris talked about him. Not just the usual "he's cute" or "we went out last night," but real stuff, like how thoughtful Jamie was, the kind of guy who remembered what Chris liked without being asked. It was different. One Friday night, I came home from work to find Chris cooking dinner, which was rare enough to be a little suspicious, and Jamie was there too, laughing over some dumb joke. I tried to play it cool, but honestly, I was watching the two of them from the couch, feeling like an outsider looking in on something I wanted, but didn't know how to reach for. And then, just as I was thinking maybe I should step up my game, or at least stop feeling sorry for myself, Chris turns to me with this grin and says, "Hey Alex, Jamie and I were wondering, do you want to join us? Like, together?" I blinked. Twice. Maybe 3 times. It wasn't a question I was prepared for. I mean, I knew Chris was the kind of guy who could throw a curveball now and then. But this felt like the start of a completely new chapter. And honestly, I was curious. Scared, definitely. But curious, that night, I found myself wondering if maybe, just maybe, I was ready to step outside the boundaries I'd been so comfortable with. Or maybe trapped in. Because sometimes, the stuff that scares you the most is exactly what you need. So yeah, that's where I'm at. Trying to figure out what it means to share more than just a roof with my roommate, and what happens when the lines start to blur in ways I never expected. And if you're thinking, dude, how did that even work out? Well, stick around. I'm still figuring that part out too. So after Chris dropped that bomb, the room kind of went quiet for a second. Jamie was there, watching me like he was waiting for some kind of reaction. And honestly, my brain just short-circuited. I could feel my pulse jump, and I had that weird mix of excitement and panic that usually shows up when you're about to do something way out of your comfort zone. I cleared my throat, trying to sound casual, but I'm pretty sure I sounded like a total dork. Join you guys, like, how exactly? I asked, mostly because I had no clue what join us even meant in this context. Were we talking about just hanging out more? Or was Chris seriously asking if I wanted to be part of their relationship? Because that's a whole other level of roommate drama I did not sign up for. Chris just laughed, the kind of laugh that means he's already way ahead of you in the mental game. No, not just hanging out. Like, we're dating. Together. We want you to be part of it. He shrugged like it was the most normal thing in the world. Jamie nodded and smiled softly. We've talked about it a lot, and it feels right. But we didn't want to bring it up until we knew how you felt. I felt like my head was spinning. I mean, I knew Chris was open-minded, and I wasn't exactly straight, but this was new territory. My mind jumped to all the usual what-ifs. What if this ruins the friendship? What if I'm not enough? What if I mess it all up? But then, looking at Jamie's calm, honest eyes and Chris's hopeful grin, I realized something. Maybe I was scared because I wanted it to work more than I was willing to admit. I nodded slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. Okay, I want to try. That moment kind of shifted everything between us. From then on, things didn't just feel like roommates or casual hangouts, they felt like the start of something real. Or at least, something that could be real if we all put in the work. Over the next few days, we talked a lot. Boundaries, fears, expectations, all the stuff people usually avoid in the honeymoon phase. Jamie was surprisingly easy to talk to, and Chris seemed even more relaxed now that we were all on the same page. One evening, we decided to have a proper date night, like an official us night. Chris cooked one of his fancy pasta dishes while Jamie picked out a playlist that somehow mixed indie rock with old school R&B. I brought some wine that I had been saving for a special occasion, and honestly, it felt special just being there. Sitting together on the couch, the kind of comfortable silence that isn't awkward. At one point, Jamie reached over and squeezed my hand lightly. I looked at him, and he just shrugged with this shy little smile. "I'm really glad you're here," he said. It hit me harder than I expected. I'd spent so long feeling like I was on the outside looking in, and now, here I was, part of something that felt like it could be real, messy, and imperfect, but real all the same. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. The next morning, I woke up with this weird knot of anxiety in my stomach. What if I messed up? What if I wasn't as good at this as Chris and Jamie seemed to be? I wasn't used to sharing that side of myself so openly, and sometimes I caught myself pulling back, afraid of being vulnerable. Chris noticed. "Hey, you good?" he asked one morning when I was avoiding eye contact over breakfast. I shrugged, trying to brush it off. "Just nerves, I guess." He nodded knowingly. "It's weird, right? Being new at this?" "Yeah," I admitted. "It's like I want to dive in, but also want to run away." Chris laughed softly. "Welcome to our world." He gave me a look that said he understood more than he let on. That moment made me realize how much this was about trust, not just with them, but with myself. Jamie came over one afternoon, and we ended up talking for hours about everything from books to bad dating stories. We laughed about how awkward I'd been, and he told me about the first time he ever considered being in a relationship like this. It wasn't always easy, but he said the key was communication and being honest about feelings, even when it's scary. That stuck with me. One night, I found myself sitting on the porch with Chris and Jamie, just the three of us watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Chris had his arm around Jamie, and Jamie was leaning into him, but then Jamie looked over at me and smiled. "You okay?" I nodded, feeling more at ease than I had in a long time. "Yeah, I think I'm starting to get it," Chris grinned. "It's not about having it all figured out. It's about trying together." I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that until now. Looking at them both, I felt this strange mix of gratitude and hope. Maybe this unexpected invitation from Chris wasn't just about sharing a boyfriend or living arrangements. Maybe it was about finding a place where I belonged. And honestly, that felt like the best kind of gamble I'd ever taken. Things weren't perfect, of course. If anything, jumping into this new dynamic with Chris and Jamie brought its own set of challenges. Stuff I hadn't really expected when I said, "Yeah, I want to try." Like that weird tug-of-war between excitement and insecurity that seemed to pop up at the worst times. For instance, there was this one evening about 2 weeks in where I realized just how complicated sharing a relationship could get. Chris and Jamie had been planning a weekend getaway for a while, just the two of them, a little trip out of the city. I was fine with it, or at least I told myself I was. But as the day got closer, I started feeling this itch of jealousy I hadn't anticipated. Weird, right? I mean, I was the third wheel in a way I'd never been before, but this was different. It wasn't just about being left out. It was this gnawing feeling that maybe I wasn't enough, or that maybe I wasn't really part of the us they kept talking about. I didn't say anything at first, not because I was trying to hide it, but because I wasn't sure I even understood it myself. I didn't want to come off as insecure or needy. I was the new guy in this equation, after all. But Chris noticed. He always seemed to pick up on the little things. One night after they left, I was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through my phone, but not really paying attention. Chris sat down beside me, his voice soft. "Hey, you okay?" I shrugged. trying to sound casual but failing. I guess. I just didn't realize how hard this would be. He nodded, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. It's not easy, even for us. What do you mean? Chris looked at me like he was weighing how much to share. Jamie and I, we had our own growing pains. It wasn't always this seamless, perfect thing you see now. We had fights, doubts, moments where we weren't sure if we could make it work. I swallowed, feeling the weight of what that meant. So it's normal to feel this way? Absolutely, Chris said. And you're not alone. We want you here, but it has to be real for all of us. That means being honest, even if it's messy. That honesty hit me hard. I realized then that this wasn't about pretending everything was perfect or fitting into some idealized version of a relationship. It was about being real, with all the awkward, uncomfortable stuff included. After that, I started opening up more, sometimes clumsily, sometimes with more courage than I thought I had. Jamie was great at reading me too. One afternoon, we ended up sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by empty coffee mugs and half-eaten snacks, and I just blurted out, "I'm scared I'm gonna mess this up." Jamie laughed, but it wasn't mocking. It was warm and understanding. "If you wanted perfect, you should have just stayed single like the rest of us," he joked. Then more seriously, he added, "Look, none of us have it all figured out. But that's why we're doing this together. You're not here by accident." That night, something shifted. I wasn't just the roommate or the third wheel. I was part of something that was growing, fragile but promising. But the real test came a few days later, when we all went out together for the first time as a trio. Chris and Jamie had this tradition of hitting a local jazz bar on Thursdays, and this time, I tagged along. The place was dimly lit, music mellow and smoky, and the kind of joint where everyone seemed to know each other. I felt like a fish out of water at first, not really sure how to act or where I fit in. Chris introduced me around like I was an official part of the crew, and Jamie held my hand under the table like it was the most natural thing in the world. I could see people glancing our way. Some curious, others maybe a little skeptical, but honestly, I didn't care. For once, I felt seen. At one point, Jamie leaned in and whispered, "You're doing great." That made me smile, and I squeezed his hand back. Later, as the night wore on, Chris suggested we dance. I hesitated. Dancing was not my thing, but Jamie's encouragement and Chris's goofy grin convinced me to give it a shot. We moved awkwardly at first, all three of us laughing when I stepped on Chris's toes, or Jamie pulled me too close. But somewhere between the offbeat rhythms and shared laughter, it felt like we were carving out this little world where none of the outside noise mattered. By the end of the night, I realized something important. This wasn't just about adding a third person to a relationship. It was about creating a new kind of connection that didn't look like what I'd known before, but felt honest and alive. Still, not everything was sunshine and rainbows. There were moments, quiet ones, when I wondered if I was really cut out for this. Like the night I caught myself overthinking a text from Jamie, imagining every possible meaning behind a simple "good night." Or the mornings when Chris and Jamie would share inside jokes I didn't get, making me feel like the odd one out again. One afternoon, I finally decided to bring it up. We were all sitting on the couch, the sunlight filtering through the curtains, and I blurted out, "I'm scared sometimes, you know? Like I don't belong or that I'm just in the way." Jamie looked at me with that steady kindness that made me want to trust him. "You belong here as much as we do. This isn't about fitting into a mold. It's about building something new." Chris nodded, pulling me into a side hug. "We're figuring it out, just like you." That moment felt like a breakthrough. I realized that being vulnerable wasn't a weakness here. It was the only way forward. As the weeks went by, our dynamic grew stronger. We had our ups and downs, sure, miscommunications, moments of jealousy, and the occasional awkward conversation. But beneath it all, there was this genuine care that made me want to keep trying. One night, as we were winding down after a long day, Jamie surprised me by pulling out a little notebook. "I've been jotting down things I love about us," he said, grinning like a kid showing off a secret. I laughed, taking the notebook. Inside were little notes, doodles, and reminders. Everything from Chris's terrible coffee-making skills to Alex's laugh that makes me forget the world. It was silly, but it meant more to me than I expected. That notebook wasn't just a collection of words. It was proof that this, whatever this was real. And honestly, I was starting to believe that maybe I could be real in it too. After Jamie handed me that little notebook, I sat there for a minute, flipping through the pages like it was some kind of treasure map. It was goofy and sweet all at once, a mix of his handwriting, doodles, inside jokes, and heartfelt notes. I could see the way he and Chris looked at me, that hopeful, almost shy expression that made me feel like I'd just been let in on the best secret of their lives. It was a feeling I hadn't expected to have so soon, but there it was, this growing sense that I actually belonged somewhere. That night, after they'd gone to bed, I stayed up on the couch, the notebook resting on my lap. I kept thinking about how far things had come since that first awkward conversation when Chris asked if I wanted to join them. Back then, I was so scared of messing everything up. Now, I was scared of losing what we were building. I guess that's the way it goes. Love never really comes without a little fear. But there were still questions swirling in my head. How do you really make a relationship like this work? How do you balance 3 sets of feelings, needs, and boundaries without one person feeling left out? I knew I was in for a learning curve. A few days later, we decided to have a relationship check-in night. It sounded kind of clinical, but it was really just us sitting around the kitchen table with snacks and wine, laying everything out there, the good, the bad, the confusing. Chris started us off, saying how much he appreciated having me in their lives, but admitted he sometimes worried about whether he was being fair with his attention. Jamie chimed in with his own fears about accidentally making me feel like a third wheel. And when it was my turn, I surprised myself by confessing the little insecurities I'd been bottling up. It was one of those rare moments where you realize that everyone's just as human and vulnerable as you are, even if they seem confident on the surface. And hearing Chris and Jamie admit their fears made me feel less alone. After we talked for a while, Chris reached over and squeezed my hand. "We're figuring this out, man. One day at a time." I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in weeks, but it wasn't always smooth sailing. There was this one weekend that particularly tested us, a mix of miscommunication and old insecurities bubbling up in all the wrong ways. Chris had planned a surprise dinner for Jamie's birthday and invited me to help set everything up. I was excited but also nervous about how involved I should be. I didn't want to overstep or make it about me. But then, while I was out picking up a cake, I caught myself texting Jamie a bit too much, trying to coordinate and double-check details. Jamie responded warmly, but I could tell he was a little distracted. Later that evening, when the dinner was underway, Chris and Jamie shared this little moment, just the two of them, laughing and whispering in their own world. I could feel the pang of jealousy creeping in again, the old fear that I was still the outsider. I tried to shrug it off, but it lingered like a shadow. After everyone left and we were cleaning up, I blurted out, "Do you guys even want me here? Or am I just tagging along?" Jamie froze for a second, then looked me in the eyes. "Of course we want you here. You're not tagging along. You're part of this." Chris nodded, but then added, "I get it. Sometimes it feels like we're caught up in our own thing and forget to bring you in." That was honest. And it hurt a little, but it also made me realize how much work this was going to take. Constant effort to stay connected, to communicate when things weren't clicking. We ended up sitting on the couch, talking through the awkwardness, and I think that night was a turning point. We all realized that love, especially the kind we were trying to build, wasn't just about good times and sweet gestures. It was about sitting with discomfort, being honest when you felt scared or left out, and choosing to stay even when it gets messy. The days after that felt different. I found myself more willing to speak up when something bothered me, and Chris and Jamie seemed more tuned in, making subtle efforts to include me in their conversations and plans. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. One afternoon, Jamie and I went out for coffee while Chris was busy with work. We ended up wandering into that little bookstore where Jamie worked, and it felt like stepping into his world in a way I hadn't before. He showed me his favorite sections, told me stories about the regular customers, and even recommended a book he thought I'd like. I left with a small stack of novels and this warm feeling that I was becoming part of their lives, not just physically, but emotionally. Back home, Chris greeted me with that goofy grin he always has, like I was his favorite person in the world. And as we sat down for dinner that night, the three of us sharing stories and laughing, I realized I was starting to see our trio not as a complicated experiment, but as home. Of course, that didn't mean I wasn't still stumbling. Like the time I accidentally called Jamie by Chris's name during a really clumsy moment, or when I got overwhelmed trying to balance my own needs with the dynamics of the relationship. But each mistake was a lesson, and every awkward moment brought us closer. One night, lying in bed, I caught myself thinking about how strange and unexpected all of this was. From being the quiet roommate to being an actual piece of this puzzle. It wasn't what I imagined my life would look like, but it was mine, messy and beautiful. And honestly, I was starting to believe that sometimes the best kind of love is the one you never saw coming. A few weeks later, I was starting to get comfortable in this three-way rhythm of ours, the way Chris, Jamie, and I navigated life together. But then, just when I thought I had a handle on things, something unexpected happened that shook the whole balance. It was a rainy Tuesday evening. I had just gotten home from work, soaked through and craving nothing more than a hot shower and some quiet. Chris and Jamie were already there, sitting on the couch in the living room, talking in hushed tones. When I walked in, they both looked up and smiled, but something felt off, like there was an unspoken tension hanging in the air. Chris patted the spot next to him and I flopped down, trying to shake off the dampness. Before I could say anything, Jamie spoke up, his voice a little quieter than usual. "Alex, can we talk about something?" That's when I knew this wasn't going to be a casual chat. Chris nodded and Jamie went on. "We've been thinking a lot about how things are going, about us, about you joining our relationship." I felt my stomach tighten. Was this going to be one of those "we need to rethink this" moments? I braced myself. Jamie continued, "It's been amazing having you with us. You've brought something special." But we also realized that it's not just about us anymore. It's about all three of us, and sometimes that's complicated. Chris chimed in, "We don't want to lose what we have, but we also don't want anyone feeling left out or overwhelmed." I took a deep breath. Yeah, I get it. Things have been different. Sometimes I felt like I'm in the way, and other times, like I want more but don't know how to ask. Jamie reached out and squeezed my hand. "We want this to work, Alex. But it means being honest, even when it's hard." That night we opened up like never before. We talked about fears, jealousy, insecurities, all the stuff we tried to skirt around before. It wasn't easy, but for the first time, I felt like we were truly on the same team, facing the challenges head on. The next day, I found myself thinking about how relationships, no matter how unconventional, are really just about trust and communication. And that trust was something I was more than willing to fight for. Later that week, we decided to take a weekend trip out of the city, a sort of mini vacation to reset and reconnect. It was the first time the three of us had spent that much time together outside the familiar walls of our apartment. We rented a small cabin by a lake, the kind of place with creaky wooden floors, and a fireplace that smelled like pine. The weather was crisp, and the leaves were turning all sorts of fiery colors. It felt like the perfect setting to escape the chaos of everyday life. On the first night, we sat around the fire pit, wrapped in blankets, sipping wine and sharing stories. Chris was in his element, teasing Jamie about his terrible campfire marshmallow roasting skills, while Jamie shot back with playful insults. I found myself laughing more than I had in months. At one point, Jamie turned to me with that easy smile and said, "I'm really glad you're here, Alex." My heart skipped. Me too. The days that followed were a mix of hiking, cooking together, and lazy mornings with no alarms. We found a quiet rhythm, the kind that comes from being comfortable with each other's presence without needing constant conversation. One afternoon, while we were out on the lake in a small rowboat, something clicked inside me. As the sun sparkled on the water and Chris and Jamie paddled beside me, I realized that this was more than just an experiment or a fling. This was becoming home. But just as I was settling into that feeling, I noticed Chris looking a little distant. When I asked him about it later, he admitted he'd been worried about how much time we were spending together and how it might affect his work. It reminded me that balancing three lives isn't always easy. There are real-world stresses, and sometimes things get messy. Back in the city, we all agreed to be more mindful about giving each other space when needed, while still making time for us. One night, after a long day, Jamie and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen, cooking dinner together. We moved around each other awkwardly, neither of us great cooks, but enjoying the moment nonetheless. Jamie leaned closer and whispered, "I love how chaotic this is." I smiled, feeling the warmth of the kitchen and the quiet connection between us. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Chris. "Hey, can we all meet up? I think we need to talk." My heart sank a little. The next few hours were a roller coaster of conversations, emotions, and revelations. Chris admitted he was feeling overwhelmed, worried about juggling work, our relationship, and his own needs. Jamie confessed feeling guilty for leaning on me too much. And I shared the stress I'd been bottling up about wanting to feel more secure in our trio. It was messy. It was hard, but it was real. By the end of the night, we had a plan, a way to check in regularly, to be honest about our limits, and to support each other without losing ourselves. That commitment felt like the glue holding us together. In the weeks that followed, I noticed subtle changes. Chris was more relaxed at home, Jamie more attentive, and I was learning how to love without losing myself. One evening, after a quiet night in, Chris pulled me aside. "Alex, I just want you to know that you're not just our roommate or the third in this. You're part of our family now." I felt a lump in my throat. "Yeah, I feel that too." Jamie joined us, wrapping his arms around both of us, and in that moment, I realized how far we'd come from that first awkward invite. Love isn't always neat or easy. Sometimes it's uncomfortable, confusing, and scary. But when it's real, it's worth every messy, beautiful moment. It's funny how something that started out feeling so uncertain can grow into the most unexpected kind of certainty. Sitting here now, with Chris and Jamie laughing in the next room, I'm struck by how much has changed, not just in our relationship, but in me. I'm no longer that quiet guy watching from the sidelines, wondering if I belonged. I belong. Plain and simple, we've worked through the rough patches, the jealousy, the insecurities, the awkward moments where none of us knew exactly how to fit together. Those times weren't easy, but they were necessary. They taught me that love isn't about perfection or fitting into some neat box. It's about showing up, being honest, and choosing each other even when it's uncomfortable. Last weekend, we took a walk through the park near our place. The weather was crisp, the leaves turning gold and red. Jamie held my hand, Chris had his arm around both of us, and we moved at an easy pace, not needing to say much. There was this silence between us that wasn't about distance but connection, a quiet space where all three of us could just be. At one point, Chris stopped and looked at us, his expression soft. "You know, I never thought I'd find something like this. Not just a relationship, but a family." Jamie smiled and nodded. "Same here. It's messy and complicated, but it feels right." I squeezed their hands, feeling something deep and steady in my chest. "Yeah, me too." That moment felt like a quiet promise. Not the flashy kind that comes with grand gestures or declarations, but the everyday kind. The kind built on trust, laughter, and 1,000 little moments where we choose to stay. I think that's what I've learned most. Love isn't just the big, sweeping feelings you see in movies. Sometimes, it's the simple, steady presence of someone who sees you, accepts you, and wants to walk beside you, even when the path isn't clear. Sharing this life with Chris and Jamie has taught me more about myself than I ever expected. I'm learning how to be vulnerable without fear, how to communicate without walls, and how to hold space for love that's bigger than just two people. Maybe our story isn't conventional, and maybe it won't always be easy, but it's ours. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. So here's to whatever comes next, for the messy, beautiful, imperfect love we're building together. Because sometimes, the best things in life are the ones you never saw coming.